name's Barbara Ilsley, and I'm speaking and welcoming you here in my role as co-director of the Geddes Institute. I'm delighted to see so many of you here. I know that some of you have come quite a long distance, so thank you for that. But we're also delighted to have support from many local practitioners who support us regularly. I think the audience today is very diverse and mixed. We have academics and practitioners. We have representatives from a range of different professions and from non-professions. Certainly in the built environment, from architecture, planning, surveying, urban design. But in addition to that, I know we have people here from education, from health, and indeed we have some people from local communities. So it's fantastic that we've got such a diverse range of people in the audience to join in our debates and discussions this afternoon. This symposium today is the fourth in a series, and the previous symposia have been around the practice of master planning. They've been around community charrettes, and last year was creating sustainable communities. And what we hope to do this afternoon is to build on the outcomes of those previous events. Because there's so much more to explore, to develop. And what we hope to do, of course, is focus on the professionals' changing role in creating successful places. And we all have, I think, lots of different perspectives and views to bring to those discussions. So at this point, I want to say no more, but just say welcome, and I hope you enjoy the afternoon. And then I will hand over to my colleague, Hussam Alwer, who's going to say a little bit about the background context and say something about the structure of the afternoon before we quickly move on to our speakers. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, and thanks for coming. My name is Hussam, senior lecturer in the university. I'm so delighted actually to see such diversity today. I'm afraid it's not up to me to decide how the weather should look like in Dundee, but we'll try next time to have a better weather for all of you. It is going to be a very busy day, and I'm afraid to say every single one in this room has got a role in this program. We're going to have a very busy workshop, and I'm so pleased to see as well we've got some diverse students as well who are joining us for only the speakers talk for the next 2 hours or so. We are aiming hopefully to finish sharply by 5. I believe everyone in this room has got badge and a bag. Just briefly how we start this story, placemaking in Dundee. After having a lot of, actually, it's 3 years back, discussion with my colleagues, my friends, in private sectors, public sectors, governments, even academic, we really have a lot of questions, and we thought we really should find, hopefully, collectively answer for them. And we started 2 years ago with Architecture Design Scotland and other partners on the issue of what we mean by master planning under the current conditions. What do we mean when we say master planning as part of the place-making agenda? And we raised some questions, and I'm going to just to flash them quickly. And then we have another one based on the outcomes of the first one to do with, okay, where charrette and the practice of charrette fits under the agenda of master planning with reference to Scotland. And last year as well, we debated the issue of creating sustainable community under the umbrella of master planning. But this is what my colleague in Architecture Design Scotland, David Lawler, unfortunately he's not here to join us. But this is the first slide we established together. And I have to admit, this is the 4th series, and we're still trying to answer some of these issues. What story are we trying to make? what story we trying to make with reference to places we create in Scotland, given the current conditions, environmentally, socially, and economic. What story we train, what works, and why. If we really want to make most of our resources, we're talking about efficiency, and we talk about resource performance, make most of it, but versus, that's the challenge. Yes, making most of our resources, but creating better public life and economic leverage. How do you bring them together? And of course, the only means is through collaboration at various levels and various scales. But why we do the collaboration? To create impact on the ground and to make difference on people's life on the ground. That's what came as a first slide, and we discussed that in those 3 symposium issues of value, soft and hard, place itself, what do we mean by place, and positioning ourselves, and positioning the community from these places. I am not going to read all through this one, but let's summarize actually the last 3 symposiums, what we came with. What we came with. If we really want to have collaboration, we need places must be, can place making manage change to create impact, and how? And we end up with 7 principles. I'm afraid I really don't want to go with all of them, but one issue, critical issue, came from the last symposium after the workshop, the role of professionals and professions, their status, how and by whom. And I've got now to leave the room to Barbara to introduce our speakers. Thank you very much.
Okay, it gives me great pleasure to welcome the first of our speakers, who is Ian Cooper, Ian is going to speak to us on professions, placemaking and the public, what next. Ian trained as an architect and then went on to gain his PhD at the Welsh School of Architecture in Cardiff University. From there, he went to Cambridge University in 1980 on an energy research fellowship from the SSRC. But he left academia quite quickly after that and became a partner in Eclipse Research Consultants, which is where he is today, or remains today. Eclipse is a Cambridge-based consultancy concerned with strategic research into the sustainable production and consumption of the built environment. Ian has been a visiting professor at the School of the Built Environment in Salford University from 1996 till this year, and he's also a board member of the Sustainable Development Foundation. So I'm very delighted to welcome Ian to set us off this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always said that you should never begin by apologising, but I feel that I need to. I have a cold that has robbed me of a large part of my voice. Not only of the volume, but of its timbre, so that I don't even recognise the voice that I'm speaking with at the moment. Are you able to hear me at the back? Excellent. I am relieved. Thank you. Okay, so I've been given the responsibility of offering the provocation of framing the sets of questions that we want you to think about during the course of this afternoon, some of which we're going to ask you to answer individually, and some of which we're going to ask you to address through group discussion, which will occur in the breakout spaces that we will introduce you to later. And as you've already heard, the Geddes Institute is running a series of symposiums And as you've already heard, they've covered them on master planning and charrettes. I don't have a slide for one, but last year's was about building sustainable communities. You've already seen this slide that Busan put up, which is about the journey that the Institute is on with other stakeholders, with professionals, with people from the private sector and the public sector, and local community stakeholders, about what is the nature of placemaking, how does that relate to master planning, and how do both of those relate to delivering sustainable communities on the ground. And today's is specifically about placemaking and its relationship to those professionals who attempt to deliver it and those other stakeholders, the public, who they attempt to engage in that process. So what's the attention, the focus of attention that we want you to use during this afternoon? Well, we want you to think about these three categories that are in the title of the symposium. You probably use them very frequently in your working life in order to frame what you do, but you probably do this without necessarily being conscious of doing it. What we want you to do today is to think explicitly about what do we mean when we talk about the professions involved in placemaking? What do we mean when we talk about placemaking? And who is the public? What is the nature of this public that should be engaged in placemaking? And in particular, we want you to think about what you mean when you use these three categories, because you cannot assume that the person sitting next to you means the same thing by it. And in addition, we want you to think about how the meanings attached to each of these three categories are shifting in the way in which you use them and other people use them, and are being demonstrated through the working practices that you're adopting or moving towards. And then later this afternoon, in the discussion groups, we'll ask you to go back to those three topics and ask you what is happening now, what needs improving, and what do we collectively, who can move towards such a position in such a short period of time, what do we want to happen next on this front in terms of professionals engaging with the public in order to deliver more effective placemaking? And as I've already alluded, one of the problems is that we may well have unshared meanings. Placemaking, for example, may well be like the word design. If you've ever worked with architects and engineers, they both use this word. They mean very, very different things by it. And in that sense, that words like placemaking and design can actually act like false friends. False friends are words that look the same in different languages, but do not share the same meaning. And so the example I've given here is confection, which in French actually means the clothing industry or the rag trade. It doesn't have that meaning at all in English. We could easily be using a word to mean very different things without necessarily recognizing that we are doing that. And so we need to be explicit with each other about what we mean by placemaking. And I'll try to move you towards being explicit with each other about that during the course of the afternoon. It's not only that, but words also have a history. The meaning of words is not static over time. They tend to change and evolve. This is a set of slides that my colleague Eleanor Warwick used on a master's course at Cambridge University a couple of years ago. And she used this set of publications to make 2 points. One is that the notion of place has changed distinctly since Lynch published his book in the 60s. In the 60s, it was very much to do with the hard, physical, and tangible aspects of urban settings. And over time, the notion of place has grown. It still contains those elements, but it has become much softer and now includes aspects of people's senses of identity and well-being, and also includes performance-related issues. How do you measure how different aspects are being delivered effectively through time, which you would not find at all in the 1960s. And so what we have here is a notion of place which is evolving over time. It's becoming much broader. It includes hard and soft components, and now it has much more strong assessment-related performance issues attached to it than we would have recognised 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. Now this is a very complicated diagram, and you will find that you have a copy of it in your delegates packet. It might be worth you pulling it out and looking at it. It's a very abstract diagram. It comes from Beidler's PhD. What Beidler did here was to read through the literature for us and say, all these people have talked about place. I'm going to try to show you how their notions of place fit together. It's a complex diagram, but reading from left to right, it goes from hard to soft. So the further you are on the left of the diagram, the harder the definition of place is. It's more to do with physical attributes. The more further to the right you are, the softer the notion of place is, and the more it has to do with people's senses of identity. Now, why have I introduced this to you? Because it is a very abstract framework. Well, because when you listen to today's presenters, you might like to ask yourself the question, if and when they talk about place, where do they fit on this diagram, at least from left to right? And indeed, if you practice placemaking in any way through your work, you might like to think about where your own notion of placemaking sits on this definition. And I wouldn't ask you to do anything that I'm not prepared to do myself, so here am I. My own interest in place, as I say at the bottom, came about almost entirely by accident. It was because I was very involved in stakeholder engagement in urban regeneration. And I realised that people's sense of place and attachment to place had almost no bargaining currency in negotiations about whether or not their area should be regenerated or the form in which it should be regenerated. And so I thought, well, this is a cultural inheritance issue. Surely the people who work in cultural heritage do this better. They have a much better understanding of the importance of the past and the present and its relationship to the future. I'll go away and look at how they deal with place. And so my own interest is, if I can make this work, very strongly on this side. Although I came as an architect from here, I now typically work over here. And that's just to be explicit with you about where I stand in relation to that spectrum that I'm talking about this afternoon. And then if you look at another word in the title of the symposium, the public, this is far too undifferentiated a term to be useful to us, except as a catch-all. For either analytical or practical purposes, we really need to be able to disaggregate what we mean when we try to talk about the public and their involvement in placemaking. And here is McGlynn and Samuel's attempt to do this about 15 years ago, where they tried to identify who are all the types of stakeholders that are engaged in placemaking. This is a diagram that is still very actively used now. Fundamentally, there are only two types of stakeholders related to placemaking. Those who find themselves in a position to influence the decisions that are taken for one reason or another, and those who find themselves being affected by decisions taken by others, and who are or believe themselves to be unable to influence those decisions. So there's two notions of a stakeholder, those who actively influence decisions and those who are impacted by them. Of course, we all play many roles in life, and so on one occasion we find ourselves in one group, and on another occasion we find ourselves in another. And this is by no means a simple issue. Here's a diagram that John Stonard drew for Kay when Liverpool 1 was under development. And in this diagram, he simply tried to identify all of the agencies, i.e. not individuals, but some kind of interest group that he had to engage with on Cape's behalf in stakeholder development terms for the delivery of that large area of the city. And I put a note at the bottom to remind me to say to you that often when we think about the stakeholders who need to be engaged, we tend to think about the local community. This is a community of place, a community that arises because they are located in the same place. But in practice, they're not the only kind of community that we need to reach out and engage with when we are placemaking. There are also communities of interest, people who have a shared interest in a particular area, whether they're property developers or interested in classical music. And you also have communities of practitioners. You have architects, planners, investment specialists. And each of these also represents a stakeholder group that we have to engage with. And especially this is the case if we think that placemaking requires the development of either strategic alliances or coalitions of interest. But what we're trying to do is to bring together people with very, very different sets of aspirations and concerns, and to bind them together for a period of time so that they can jointly decide something or some kind of notion of point of view. What do we mean by the professions in the topic? Well, as I tried to suggest here, the professions as we know them now largely grew out of Enlightenment and industrialisation as a means of forming and maintaining boundaries in order to protect the interest of specific population groups, whether they happen to be architects, planners, surveyors, whoever. And one of the ways in which professions do this is by mapping divisions of knowledge onto perfected divisions of labour. Only certain groups can do this because they're the ones who are recognised as having the legitimate expertise to be able to make decisions in those areas. And professions are very capable at maintaining these divisions and the privileges that accompany them, largely through controlling admission to their work territory and behaviour within it, and expelling those who don't conform to what are regarded as acceptable ways of behaviour. And so this is achieved by introducing regulated professional training routes, devising rules of conduct, setting standards, raising a set of shared ideals about behaviour and performance, and constructing and defining shared knowledge domains. And I guess if we were to ask people in the room if they were professionals, they would begin to explain where they stand in relation to some of those issues. What's interesting is that sustainable development as a goal, as an objective, as a pursuit, as a journey, is threatening to professions because it threatens the existing boundaries and the way those are policed and protected. But it's also an opportunity because it means that professionals can begin to operate in areas that are traditionally occupied by others. By gaining new skill sets, they're able to expand the boundaries of what they do. But even more importantly, I think, sustainable development is a threat to professionals because there is a notion underpinning sustainable development that lay people should participate in influencing the decisions that affect their lives. That they should have a degree of self-determination. We can see that if we go back to Rio, we can see very, very clearly that it was an aspiration that lay people would be much more engaged in making the decisions that affect their lives. And so we have to ask, how can professionals maintain their expertise while embracing this idea that lay people should be given more degrees of freedom in influencing decisions that affect their lives? Now, this is quite a live debate amongst professionals, or at least it's quite a live debate among some professionals. I've offered you two examples here from Stephen Hill from Future Planners, where he's arguing that if we look across the professions, the built environment professions, there are different approaches to how we can be more inclusive in the way we engage with other people. So he quotes Jeremy Tiller saying, one of the most commonly made mistakes is to confuse professional propriety with an ethical position, as if acting in accordance with the code of professional conduct will ensure ethical behaviour. Standards even my hairdresser. I don't know why Jeremy has it in for hairdressers. And then he quotes from the charter, the engineering, the ICE Royal Charter, which very clearly sets out where its members' responsibilities lie, particularly in relation to civil society, as Tara will be talking about later. And between them, there are, across the disciplines, a group of professionals who, through the Edge Debate series held in London, have come up with this set of 10 principles about what building professionals should be doing in future to be more permeable, more receptive to the notion that they both owe responsibilities to civil society and need to engage effectively with them. Okay, so what are we asking you to do this afternoon? Well, we are asking you to listen, but we're asking you to listen very actively. We want to know what you think you hear in the course of the afternoon that would help answer these 3 questions that the Geddes Institute has set itself. And you will find 2 more things in your delegates pack to help you do this. The first of these is an aid memoir, and it's simply an opportunity for you, as you listen to each of the speakers that are going to follow before the group discussion, and indeed when Chris Brown comes back and talks after the group discussion, to ask yourself, what do you hear that would help the Geddes Institute to answer any of these questions? And the aid memoir is simply there to help you make a note of those as we go along, because by the end of the day, we're going to ask each of you to have filled in this one, which simply asks you to record where you think we are in relation to those 3 questions. So by the end of the day, we would like you to have filled this in. Please do it at any point in the course of the afternoon, but especially towards the end, so that we can collect it from you before we go. So there's the aid memoir. There's the closing set of questions that we'd like you to fill in for us. And if you're interested, you can go back and look at the sources of the material as well. Thank you.
A few minutes if there's any questions. Does anyone have anything at this point they want to ask Ian? Any questions?
None at all? None at all? In that case, I will be reminding you about the set of questions that we have there later on this afternoon, and I will also be introducing you to the sets of questions that are going to be, thank you, I'm also going to be introducing you to the set of questions that we're going to use when we go out into the discussion groups. Can I hand it back to you?
Yes, that's fine. I'll use this one. Please hand it over to Ian. To introduce our next speaker, who is Ian Geddes, who is the Chief Architect and Head of Scottish Government's Architecture and Place team, which of course sits within the Government's Planning and Architecture Division. Ian joined what was then the Scottish Executive back in 1999 and was one of those initially working on the Scotland's first policy on architecture, was published in 2001. And within the government's architecture in place provides advice to Scottish ministers on architecture in the built environment, and of course is the sponsor team for Architecture and Design Scotland. Ian has been involved with architectural education for many years, for over 24 years, and is currently visiting professor at the University of Strathclyde's Department of Architecture. And I'm delighted that he's going to be giving our second talk on delivering sustainable places, finding common ground. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me okay? On this microphone? Is that all right?
It's not quite. Is it picking up at the back? Yes.
Is that okay? Yeah, what I was going to do this afternoon was start off with a kind of personal note, which reflects on a recent visit I had to the Venice Biennale, which this image comes from. And if you want to see a kind of, I suppose, a global view of the architect's profession, thinking at any time, it's good to go to the Venice Biennale and kind of get that perspective. And quite like this sort of entrance. This is the Japanese pavilion, which the show was called In the Real World. And it made me think about that, that connection to the real world, and somehow as a profession you're sort of somehow out of the real world, or you're seen as not being part of the real world, not part of the community. And then there's other, when you flip between the real world and the conceptual world, and the world of possibilities, I suppose. So I was thinking about how our ideas can shape or influence, I suppose, that real world situation, and how that offers us challenges as professionals throughout our career. Having said that, I think that Japanese pavilion did provide a real treasure trove of ideas about all this. The second thing I was going to do, I suppose, and the second bit of inspiration, I suppose, I got from the Biennale was around the theme of fundamentals, going back to the show was created by Ren Koolhaas, that was this overarching theme of the fundamentals of architecture, and looking at the impact of modernism over the last 100 years. I thought that was very thought-provoking in relation to, I suppose, the theme of today's symposium. So it kind of changed the way I approached this, and probably just as well, because I think if I had approached it as a way I was intending to approach it, I would have said a lot of what I think Ian was saying about definitions and problems around that. So what I'm actually going to do is more of a kind of personal, position myself as a professional and what ideas have influenced my thinking, and hopefully that will offer some points for discussion later. So it's kind of a link between the personal and the professional, thinking about, I suppose, not what happens next or what we need to do, but also looking at what's happened and how that influences our thinking going forward. And when I started to do that kind of personal reflection, it kind of was a bit scary, because I realised it's 30 years almost to the day since I got a Part 3. So, and that's, I've been working in this school for 30, I can't believe it. And 15 years I've been at the Scottish Government or the Scottish Executive. And I was going to do that thing and look back and do all that, what happened 30 years ago, but the only thing I could find was that it's 30 years since Madonna sang Like a Virgin. So, so I'm not going to go any further with that, but also the other thing that made me think of this is that seeing this inspiration, I'll talk about this later, but Rob Adams was over from Melbourne City, design leader in Melbourne, and talking about his sort of 30 years of working there, really inspirational. So, and when I was in Venice, this is a painting in the Grazie Foundation, new building by Tadeo Ando, fantastic building. I saw this painting, I saw the city planning some there, and I thought, maybe this is how you feel in the real world, or at least when times are bad, this is maybe the impression that you get as working a professional in the world we're faced with adversarial kind of things we have to deal with. But then, in the Giardini, I came across this, and this is the Maison Domino, and it took me right back to my first year studying architecture at Edinburgh University, because this was one of the first programmes we were given. To take the Domino House, which was a kind of idea of doing low-cost housing that Corbusier come up with, and develop a fit-out or a programme around it. So you're given the framework, and you had to come up with an idea for that. So again, it kind of made me think about what we were being taught as young architectural students at that time. I suppose it was a kind of late modern period where, all of a sudden was a kind of reawakening of interest in the city, of community, and ecological concerns. And I remember one of the most inspirational talks I had during my undergraduate course was by Howard Liddell on the ecological crisis that we were facing. And that has really always stuck with me. I got the chance to do a year's study with Howard Liddell in Aberfeldy later as a student. And I think those sort of concerns over that course of generation I'm talking about have really continued to surface and define our key professional challenges. And just as, I don't know if that shows up, maybe it doesn't show up, but that was my daughter's. The family came with me to Geddes this thing, and that was her sketch of the Domino House, which actually looked quite interesting. We started to do a bit of a screen, some ideas about Brique-Sayé or something like that. And Finn, my son, he did all these sketches, and then didn't realise he was going to do this. I took the sketchbook back to the apartment we were staying in, started to model it all in Minecraft. So you've got the Campanile in Minecraft and the Domino House in Minecraft. That was amazing, wasn't it? He's making all these notes, like brick, over 5 you can see him. That was already doing his Sorby notes. I didn't even tell him to do that. It's just his own thing. Anyway, moving on. I'll move back. No, to that. I don't know that way. So here's some other images from the Biennale. There's at the top, right hand corner, there's the Toyo Ito's. I found the Domino House again. This was Toyo Ito, and actually built housing based on that kind of idea. Probably much better he did it than I did. And in the Dutch Pavilion on the left, there's this really great exhibition around the ideas of welfare state, the link to planning and architecture, the comprehensive kind of campaign and the massive changes that took place post-war, and that was around the work of the lady thinker Bacema. And it was also looking at ways of engaging with the public and communities, which of course is an ongoing challenge. And then the fundamentals show, which is just one slide from that by Koolhaas, these different elements of architecture were reviewed in detail. This particular bit is the story of the balcony and the tension between the collective and the individual that's highlighted there. And Koolhaas himself, in the introduction, talks about his own formative experience of feeling the sun in his face in his parents' balcony in the Netherlands. And you don't usually get a lot of kind of almost like emotional stuff from Koolhaas, but there we go. And then in the Brazilian Pavilion, which is a great show, I found this quote from Niemeyer, which was describing the ideas, key projects that have been linked to the development of Brazil as a nation in the last century, because a lot of these shows were about modernisation, not just modernism. And the quote is, "Architects must be the active elements of the current moment, understanding the problems of our time, and above all, decisively supporting those who seeking sincerely to work towards our country's progress propose a programme that is just and truly based on the most essential demands of our people, thereby giving our profession its indispensable humanitarian character." I thought that was fantastic. And so it's kind of saying we need to deal with the current moment, we need to understand the problems of our time, we need to meet the essential demands of our people and acknowledge the humanitarian character of our profession, and I suppose encapsulates what we're discussing here at the seminar today. So I suppose we could just stop there. But there is questions about, what are our values, how do we engage, and why is placemaking important for our professions, collectively and individually. And in Scotland, and we were there because we had a Scotland and Venice contribution over the course of October, project curated by Regan Hall and Neil Gillespie, and that explored modernism in place in Scotland, mainly from the 50s, 60s and 70s, which is maybe an under-researched area in relation to place. And there was 5 newspapers produced, and we didn't have a pavilion, we had a table. But it was good because people actually came and talked to us. We engaged with the public. We had a conversation with everybody that was visiting the Biennale, rather than, this is the thing we've done with the recent Biennale representations, is to take people to Venice and create event-based activity rather than curate stuff that sits on a wall and you don't really know what happens there. So I'm sure some of you here in Dundee will recognise Fergus Purdy, who is at the Scottish. This is their week, his team's project. The other thing about this project I thought was great was the fact that there were students involved in the project. And some of the newspapers, people, Margaret Richards, for example, was interviewed. Andy McMillan, I think, gave his last interview in these newspapers. So this kind of idea of, intergenerational learning, I thought was great. The students were fired up and led, very ably by Fergus. So I suppose this is the kind of theme of the talk, really, is this whole question of engagement. And that's all reflected in the challenges which we've tried to capture in our policy statements, Creating Places, which was published in June 2013. It's the 3rd architecture and place policy. And that really emphasises that quality places are successful places, the value of high quality design, what that can deliver for Scotland's communities, and the important role that buildings play in the creation of good places and promoting healthy, sustainable lifestyles. And also influence the economy, developing welcoming places, better neighbourhoods, stronger cohesive communities. All of these messages are set out in the policy, and we've also put together an action plan to try and take that forward. So, and the key thing is it's a complex activity. It needs shared vision and collaborative processes to make it work. So what we're supposed doing here is condition setting for good places to occur. And going back to the first policy, a crucial component of that policy was the kind of establishment of a national cultural programme in architecture, which was managed by the Lighthouse, a series of exhibitions, workshops, seminars, trying to create a new debate around architecture and engage the public through the work of the Lighthouse. And a lot of these were touring exhibitions. And this was the first exhibition which looked at the anatomy of the house, housing typologies. But interestingly, in that exhibition, we had people who lived in the houses talking about their interpretation of what the architect was trying to do, and the architect talking about what they were trying to do. So it's quite, an interesting contrast there. And that's, linked to places fed into, and I think the kind of what we're trying to do is bring together that kind of architectural cultural programme together with planning policy, and the new national planning framework, and SPP really has place and placemaking at its heart. Worldwide, this as we live in a more urbanised society. 80% of the population of Britain lives in urban areas. The quality of urban life is moving much higher up the local and global political agenda. And that was also reflected when I came into this work in policy, so in '99, by the work of the Urban Task Force. And it was obviously setting out an argument for better places, how it was possible to deliver places of quality, and why it was necessary. And I think the other point about this is that, you know, improvements to place don't just happen by chance. The examples that are looked at in urban renaissance were places where it took concerted effort, founded on political vision, and professionals had to work hard with politicians, developers and communities to deliver better outcomes. And Maragall, the mayor of Barcelona, is quoted in this slide in the introduction to urban renaissance, talks about the success in Barcelona of not starting with great works but actually quite small projects because there was no money, and building that consensus. So when sort of a big opportunity came along with the Olympics, the consensus was there, the trust was there, and also the quality of projects in the peripheral areas was as good as projects in the central areas of Barcelona. And you know, I think the other thing I was going to say about Barcelona was Maragall, just as an example, as mayor of Barcelona, when that early development was taking place, he was talking in Edinburgh at the Signet Library with David Mackey, who sadly passed away this week. And Maragall talked about how he would actually go and sleep in the different barrios, the different areas of Barcelona to get to know how people lived, what their problems were, and so on. And David Mackey talked about how, in terms of the redevelopment of the Olympic Village, they used the Glasgow tenement as the kind of model, the building block of that reconstruction. And you know, going back to this professional development, at the same time as that early Barcelona work was happening, I was working in, I suppose, one of the barrios of Edinburgh, Western Hales, which at the time was a disconnected community with very little social infrastructure, no footpaths designed with the scheme, reliance on the car, and so on. The situation, I suppose, there is so desperate that the community started to take matters into its own hands, and a very strong network of community activists started to look at how things could be turned around. Community Design Unit, for example, was one of the projects that was set up. So as a young graduate, that was a good way to see what impact poorly designed buildings in terms of damp, but also looking at how the community could organise itself and start to turn things around. And this is one of the sort of things. This is the sort of things we were doing. So this would now be called a pop-up street. So we got there before Shoreditch. Second-hand school units, to create a set of public services, a meeting point for local residents. So it's a street managed for and by the community. So it shows that importance of streets, for example, also a formative experience for me. And also worked in London for a while, but then came back to work in Glasgow for Technical Service Agency, again at community control, technical aid service, and also Untitled Chapter for 3 years. Part of community control practice. And one of the things that came out of all that, if you live in a damp house, issues about place and all that are actually quite secondary. If you're living in a damp house, so you really protect the quality of housing as well as place. No, let's not forget that. So anyway, after my spell of working at loose ends hairdressing, I was also going to talk about that kind of whole community movement, which took place in the 70s, led by, amongst others, Raymond Young working for Assist. And that was linked into the School of Architecture at Strathclyde. And those projects, the kind of realisation that the tenement could be an adequate building form if you install bathrooms, decent kitchens and so on. Didn't need to note this stuff down, you could restore. And the Community Housing Association movement on the back of that is still very much a key component in terms of neighbourhood renewal. And Andy McMillan, Professor Andy McMillan, who died this summer, was also, he was born in Maryhill tenement, and also vocal in the reassessment of the tenement as an appropriate form in Scotland's urban areas. And so a lot of the work the Matt were doing was about stitching, when he was teaching, stitching the fabric of Glasgow together in student projects based around that idea, and then that idea being taken forward by, for example, this Reedvale Duke Street in Glasgow. And again, they're talking about my own experience. I ended up working at Eldon Cannon in Glasgow in the late 80s, and this was one of the key projects in the office at that time, redevelopment of the Merchant City. And this, the public realm was more important than the buildings, emphasis on bringing life back to the city, walkable, mixed-use neighbourhoods. So that whole idea of interest in the city starts to emerge in the 80s, and the concept of 24-hour city, not necessarily it's important as 24 hours, it's just that it was dealing with life in the city. So I think the key thing I would say there is about, as professionals, kind of making the most of opportunities and seizing opportunities and making things happen when the chance comes along. And this was exactly what happened in Temple Bar, where a group of young professionals were able to save Temple Bar from being redeveloped as a bus station, or a bus terminal, and create opportunities for themselves to design new cultural facilities, and that's enabled a critical mass of initiatives to be achieved, and again that 24 City influence. Rob Adamson, we talked in Glasgow last week about this, in Melbourne. And 30 years ago, Melbourne was a dead centre, missed opportunity. And what they've done in Melbourne is look at a number of strategies, all described postcode 3000, which is an exhibition which I managed to bring to Glasgow. I was in Melbourne last year, so saw this at kind of first hand, this exhibition. And it just shows, it maps how Melbourne city centre went from having no dwellings to 28,000 over a 30-year period. And merchant cities done that to some extent, but not on this scale. So converting commercial property, opening up the laneways, making the city centre a destination, not somewhere to come in and out of. And then building an existing infrastructure, opening up street cafes, new public spaces, street trees, and so on and so forth. Hydrology, water management, all these things being worked on together. And Federation Square, a new public square, which takes that kind of idea of the laneways right into the new square. And so there's dynamic architecture seen there. And we've seen this also making the most of opportunities in other places. Again, part of my own professional development, I suppose, has been part of the Academy of Urbanism in the last few years. And this idea of learning from Europe has been a key factor in that. So I'm not going to go into these in detail, but one thing I would say is that in terms of waterfront, I know Dundee is very focused on its waterfront development, but I think in other places like, I don't know, maybe we miss opportunities there. And I think the whole idea of ecological urbanism, as you can see in Freiburg, has really been a driving force in my thinking and my work. And it's good to see that happen. We've got our own example at Rafi's Village in Yamara of that kind of integration, the integration of green infrastructure, good housing, delivered in partnership. And those sorts of messages are being communicated through what the Geddes is doing in Green 2014, big exhibition showing how these lessons, I think we need to build on those lessons as professionals. So going back to policy, I'll try and get through this quickly. Designing streets, I think, is a key policy shift. In terms of what next, I think this is one area, as professionals, we need to work together to get our streets right. As Rob Adams said, 80% of our urban realm is streets. We've got good streets, we've got good places. That's the range of the projects that we're taking forward under the policy. I think a key one for this discussion is the charrettes and a new model of engagement with the public, bringing professionals out of their silos, working together with communities. And we've funded over 30 of these now. And that's the sort of outcomes we're getting. This is Calendar as an example. Probably ideas that wouldn't have come out of the normal consultation process in Calendar. And that's feeding into the development process in Highland, for example, in Buzzard and Wick. We're also addressing other skills issues as professionals, trying to reintroduce drawing skills, conceptual planning, as opposed to the kind of emphasis on written policy as plan. And ADS are doing a great job of supporting us with that skills symposium, which has developed over the last 4 years. And just some of the work that came out the last one, just to show how that kind of charrette intensive way of working produced a new kind of idea of urbanism. and then that's illustrated. But this is illustrated after the workshop. This is not an illustration to take to the community. But these are ideas that are coming out of that intensive work. And Dalmarnock, again, that whole idea of green infrastructure coming in there. And we're also working with students to try and encourage that multidisciplinary approach. And one just finished Dundee and Harry Water students this week. And I think there is new models of architectural practice coming, particularly from young architects. And that's explored in the alternate ways of doing architecture. I think a lot of these younger graduates are coming out who want to do something things different and directly engage with communities and collaborate, more collaborative. Self-made cities, examples of how that's happening in Berlin. It's an international kind of movement. And we supported that in the 2012 Venice project, Critical Dialogues, which took 4 practices, all graduated from Strathclyde or connected with Strathclyde, and they engaged directly with neighbourhoods and young people in Venice itself. And that work is captured in his publication by Jonathan Charlie, who was worked with teaching at Strathclyde from 1990, and looking at alternative practice and histories, the whole narrative of place. And we did look at this in terms of how might that affect architectural education. If there had been a yes vote, we would have had to look at architectural education and regulation of the profession. So we did look at kind of alternative routes into the profession. The cost of getting into the profession could affect the way that the profession operates, for example, in England. But looking at more collaborative ventures between profession and academia, foundation courses, more multidisciplinary opportunities built in. And then coming up to the end here, again, Jan Gehl's been referenced before. I think a lot of our work has been influenced by Jan Gehl, looking at how the measurement of and the interaction between public life and public space, and the sort of tools and techniques you can use to measure that and improve it, and the importance of data in that and how it feeds into policy. So I think there's a great opportunity in 2016. Scotland has a year of architecture, design and innovation, with an opportunity to bring the public together and have a massive debate about where we go next. And if you feel like that second slide, the best thing to do, as we found in Venice, is go out there and interact with the built environment, with a sketch. That was great. I had a sketch out for a couple of years, but it was great. So, thank you.